Once upon a time, there was a very young, curious girl named Alice. Alice went for a long walk outside and soon sat down to rest. Alice began to daydream. She imagined a wonderful world where all the animals and flowers could talk. Just then, Alice looked up and saw a White Rabbit carrying a pocket watch. "I'm late," said the White Rabbit as he ran by. Alice was so curious, she tried to catch up to the rabbit. "Mr. Rabbit, please wait," called Alice. Alice followed the rabbit into a hole in the ground. She began to fall down the long tunnel, but landed just in time to see the rabbit run through a tiny door. Alice was too big to fit through the door. She saw a small bottle that had a label that read, "Drink me." Alice drank the liquid and became small enough to fit through the door. On the other side of the door, she met twins named Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The first thing in a visit is to say, "How do you do?" and shake hands. The twins took Alice's hands and danced around. Alice tried to explain that she was following the White Rabbit, but the twins didn't care. They started to tell her a story. Alice wanted to be polite, so she listened to their story, but after they finished their story, they did not give Alice a chance to speak. They just kept on talking to each other. So Alice left. Alice soon spotted the White Rabbit in the yard of his cottage. He was worried because he could not find his gloves. "I'm late," he exclaimed to Alice. She offered to help him look around his cottage for his gloves. Alice found a cookie that had a label that read, "Eat me." She ate the cookie and grew into a giant and smashed through the rabbit's cottage. The White Rabbit ran to get help to clean up the mess Alice had made. Alice had to get small again, so she picked a carrot from the rabbit's garden. As soon as she ate it, she shrunk to a tiny size. Alice tried to follow the White Rabbit again, but could not keep up. After a while, Alice found herself in a magical garden where all the flowers could speak. They asked Alice what kind of flower she was, and before she could explain, the flowers decided she was a weed. They told her to leave their garden. After she walked for some time, Alice came upon a large caterpillar sitting on a mushroom. "Well, who are you?" asked the caterpillar. "I hardly know, sir," answered Alice. The caterpillar told Alice that eating some of the mushroom would help her always be the right size. Alice had a little bit of the mushroom, and soon she was her regular size. She was so happy as she said goodbye to the caterpillar and continued on her way through the forest. She was amazed to see a grinning cat in a tree. He introduced himself as the Cheshire Cat. Alice asked the Cheshire Cat which way she should go to find the White Rabbit. He told her to ask the Mad Hatter. "I don't want to meet mad people," said Alice. "Oh, everyone is mad here," replied the Cheshire Cat, and he disappeared. Alice wanted to find the White Rabbit, so she continued on to the Mad Hatter's. She was invited to the Mad Hatter's tea party, where it was just nonsense. As she sat having tea with the Mad Hatter and his friends, the White Rabbit ran by yelling, "I'm late!" Alice followed the rabbit, but lost sight of him. The Cheshire Cat reappeared and showed Alice a shortcut to a fancy garden. Playing cards were working for the Queen of Hearts, painting roses. The rabbit ran by to announce the Queen of Hearts. Alice was happy to see him, but the Queen became angry and shouted, "Off with her head!" Alice ran away and soon found a door to get away from the Queen of Hearts and her guards. Just then, Alice awoke from her daydream. She realized she had just had a magical daydream and was happy to be awake from all the nonsense. That was just fine with Alice. Long ago, in a small village, a woodcarver named Geppetto made a wooden puppet. It looked so much like a real boy that Geppetto gave it a name, Pinocchio. The old man was so happy, he showed the puppet to his cat Figaro and his goldfish Cleo. As Geppetto showed his puppet to his dear pets, a small cricket named Jiminy Cricket snuck into Geppetto's house to have a warm night's sleep. Jiminy Cricket watched as Geppetto set the puppet down and gazed out the window at the stars. "Look at that! The wishing star!" Geppetto cried. Geppetto wished Pinocchio was a real boy. Soon it was bedtime, and Geppetto, Figaro, Cleo, and Jiminy Cricket all fell asleep. Before long, a beautiful light filled the workshop and woke up Jiminy Cricket. It was the Blue Fairy. She had heard Geppetto's wish and was there to make Pinocchio a real boy. She touched the puppet with her magic wand, and Pinocchio came to life. But Pinocchio had to prove he was brave, truthful, and unselfish to become a real boy. The Blue Fairy knew Pinocchio would need help, so she made Jiminy Cricket his helper, so he would help him to choose between right and wrong, and prove himself. Geppetto was delighted with Pinocchio, and he sent him off to school like a good parent. On the way to school, Pinocchio met a sly fox, who said Pinocchio could make a lot of money and didn't have to go to school. Jiminy Cricket didn't trust the sly fox. The sly fox said he could spend all of his time having fun in the theater instead of studying at school. Pinocchio said, "Okay!" and off he went with the sly fox to the theater owner. That night, the theater owner put Pinocchio on stage. He was a big hit as he sang and danced for the crowd. The crowd threw money on the stage. Jiminy Cricket, who was in the crowd, worried. After the show, the theater owner locked Pinocchio up and said, "You will live here and make me lots of money." Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket wondered how he could escape. Luckily, the Blue Fairy arrived. She asked Pinocchio why he missed school. He lied. She asked him more questions, and each time he told a lie, his nose grew longer and longer. The Blue Fairy reminded him to tell the truth if he wanted to be a real boy. Pinocchio promised he would tell the truth. She fixed his nose and set him free. The next day, Pinocchio met the sly fox again. The sly fox convinced Pinocchio to not go to school, but instead play and have fun all day. Pinocchio followed the fox, not returning home after regular school time. Geppetto was worried and went to look for Pinocchio. Geppetto sailed his boat to search for Pinocchio, and he was swallowed up by a huge whale. When Pinocchio returned home from playing all day, he found this out, and he knew he must save Geppetto. Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket found the huge whale, and they teased him with the fish. The whale grabbed the fish, the pole, Pinocchio, and Jiminy Cricket, and they were all swallowed into his belly. They found Geppetto in the whale's belly too. They must find a way to escape from the whale. They decided they would make the whale sneeze, and they would all escape when the whale opened his mouth. It worked, but when the whale saw them in the water, he thrashed around, knocking everyone about. Pinocchio had to grab Geppetto to save him. After a while, the water settled down and Geppetto and Jiminy Cricket awoke on the beach. They found Pinocchio lying lifeless on the rocks. Geppetto was heartbroken, and he carried his son home in his arms, convinced he had lost Pinocchio forever. Back in the workshop, Geppetto and Jiminy Cricket cried, and then all of a sudden, the blue fairy appeared. She touched her wand on Pinocchio and said, "Awake!" Pinocchio awoke, and the blue fairy said, "By saving Geppetto, you have proven yourself to be brave, truthful, and unselfish." "I am a real boy!" shouted Pinocchio. Pinocchio, Geppetto, Jiminy Cricket, and all the pets celebrated and danced as Geppetto's wish had come true. Pinocchio was a real boy. Every afternoon after school, the children loved to play in a huge garden that surrounded a deserted castle. They loved to play there. One day while playing, a great voice yelled out, "What are you doing in my garden?" It seems the giant had returned back to his castle, and he did not want the children to play there. He shouted at them and told them to leave and never come back. They all ran away as fast as they could. The giant then built a huge spiked fence around his garden, so none of the children could ever get in. The giant put a large gate in the fence with a sign that said, "Keep out," in big black letters. The children would pass by and look sadly at their favorite place to play. They really missed playing in the beautiful garden. Soon fall and winter came and covered everything in snow and frost. The giant looked out his castle window at his snow-covered garden and wished for spring to come. Spring did come, everywhere except in the giant's garden. The snow and frost were thrilled to have a place to stay forever. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard a bird singing. He leapt from his bed to look out the window. His whole garden was in spring bloom. The snow and frost were finally gone. Then he noticed all the children playing in his garden. You see, they had snuck into the garden through a hole in the wall, and spring had followed them in. One little boy was crying because he could not climb the trees like all the other children. He was just too small to reach. The giant helped the small boy to the top of the tree. The little boy gave the giant a hug and a kiss and said thank you. The giant thought it was time to let the children play in his garden, so he knocked down the big wall. The children played every day in the giant's beautiful garden. When the giant realized he had not seen the little boy he had helped to the top of the tree, he asked the other children, "Where is your little friend?" "We do not know," said the children. The giant asked the children every day if they had seen their little friend. The children told the giant, "The only day we saw him was the day you knocked down the wall." The years passed and the giant grew old and weak, and he could no longer play with the children. One cold winter morning, he was looking out the window, and he noticed the most beautiful tree he had ever seen.
Wow!
The tree was covered with delicate white blossoms with silver fruit, and beneath the tree was the little boy who had gone missing for so long. "He's come back at last," said the giant joyfully. Forgetting how old and weak he was, the giant rushed down the castle stairs and hurried across the garden. But as he neared closer towards the little boy, he saw bruises and cuts and nail marks in his hands and feet. "Who has hurt you?" asked the giant. "As old and feeble as I am, I will kill the people who have done this to you." The small child smiled gently and said, "Hush, don't be angry, but come with me." "Who are you?" whispered the giant, falling to his knees. "A long time ago, you let me play in your garden," the child replied. "Now, I want you to come and play in my garden. It is called Paradise." That afternoon, when the children came to play in the garden in the winter snow, they found their giant friend lying dead. The old giant looked so peaceful. He seemed to have a beautiful, peaceful, gentle smile on his quiet face. The giant was covered in small, beautiful white flower blossoms. The children thought he looked so happy and at rest. They said sweet prayers for him to be playing with children angels in a gorgeous paradise garden forever. The children always remembered the giant for his kind heart and generous spirit, and played in his garden forever. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in a village by a forest. Whenever she went out, she wore a red hooded cape. Everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother baked some cakes, and she asked Little Red Riding Hood to take them to her grandmother, who lived in the forest. Little Red Riding Hood was very excited and happy to go visit her grandmother. Her mother packed up the cakes in a basket and reminded Little Red Riding Hood to not waste time and go straight to her grandmother's house and to not talk to strangers. Along the path to her grandmother's house, there were flowers, ponds, and woodland animals along the way. And Little Red Riding Hood took her time and enjoyed them all. Then, all of a sudden, a wolf was beside her, asking, "Well, Little Red Riding Hood, what are you doing here?" She told him she was on her way to visit her grandmother's house in the forest. The wolf wanted to gobble up Little Red Riding Hood, but he noticed a woodcutter coming along. So the wolf thought of a plan. "Well, where does your grandmother live?" the wolf asked. Little Red Riding Hood answered, "She lives over the bridge and past the lake," she told the wolf. "Let's play a game and race to your grandmother's house to see who can get there first," said the wolf. "Okay," said Little Red Riding Hood as she ran towards her grandmother's house as fast as she could. The wolf knew a secret path that was far quicker and ran towards her grandmother's house to beat Little Red Riding Hood in the race. The wolf knocked on the grandmother's door, and she asked, "Is that you, Little Red Riding Hood?" The wolf was able to disguise his voice very well, and he replied, "Yes, grandmother, it is me." "Oh, come in, my dear Little Red Riding Hood," said grandmother. To her surprise, the big bad wolf ran in and gobbled her up. The wolf then dressed up to disguise himself as the grandmother. He put on her nightcoat and nightcap and jumped in her bed. Very soon after, Little Red Riding Hood knocked on the door. The wolf disguised his voice again and asked, "Who is it?" "It's me," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Oh, do come in, dear," crackled the wolf. When Little Red Riding Hood saw her grandmother, she barely recognized her and thought her voice sounded strange. As Little Red Riding Hood got closer, she noticed her grandmother's ears were so big and asked, "Grandmother, what big ears you have." "All the better to hear you with, my dear," croaked the wolf. "But, grandmother, what big eyes you have." "All the better to see you with, my sweet girl," replied her grandmother, who was really the wolf. "But, grandmother, "What big teeth you have," said Little Red Riding Hood, feeling very scared. "All the better to eat you with," roared the wolf as he leapt from the bed towards Little Red Riding Hood. She ran towards the door as fast as she could. And now she could fully see that it was not her grandmother, but the big bad wolf. As she was trying to escape, she yelled, "Help!" in her loudest voice. "Help!" Cutter, who was working in the forest, heard Little Red Riding Hood's cries for help and ran to help her. He caught the big bad wolf and shook him so hard that Grandmother came out all in one piece. Little Red Riding Hood hugged her grandmother and apologized for talking to strangers and wasting time. Her grandmother said, "Don't worry, dear. You have learned some important lessons. Now why don't we enjoy those delicious cakes you brought me?" The woodcutter took the big bad wolf deep into the forest, so he could never bother Little Red Riding Hood or her family ever again. The end.